So the definitions, in the globalization industry, we have, those usually about those four key definitions that we have here, four key concepts. The first one is really globalization, and under parentheses you see G11N, and for those who are not familiar, the 11 represents the number of letters between the letter G and the letter N, and the same rule applies for the other concepts on this slide. And globalization really is the overarching exercise of bringing your business or your product global. So crossing all the borders and try to see how you can penetrate all those different markets around the world. And there are two key components to this. You have a component which is really the business side and the go-to-market strategy and so forth. And then you have the engineering side, which is how do you build a product such that it can be sold, around the world. And internationalization is the exercise that engineers need to do to build a product which can easily be adapted to all the different locales around the world. So, for example, you want to make sure that your core product, if anyone around the world should be able to type in characters, should be able to have the currency, the date format and so forth should be supported. And once you have this product really well structured and architected, then you're going to start the stage of localization, which is really where the scalability comes in. And this is where you're going to start to do a lot of your different versions of the product, where you're going to do the translations, and then you're going to start to support, like, let's say 15, 30 different locales. And then your engineers will be able to set up just the right, currency and the right language and so forth for your different customers. Translation, of course, is part of localization. It's the simple, I have an English sentence and this is what it means, let's say in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese. And so that exercise of translations, which is usually used by, professional translators, this exercise is, a subtask of localization. And then finally, a key aspect too is culturalization, which is, sometimes to enter some markets, you might need to develop some features that are really specific to that market. So for example, if you have an application that needs to deal with social media, of course, Facebook is kind of a global player, but if you go to Japan, for example, you may have to deal with Line, which is the most popular social media application that they use in Japan. So you're going to have to maybe develop some specific features for the Japanese market in that case, and that's what we mean with culturalization. So why is globalization so critical to your business? When you look at really large companies, a big chunk of the revenue of those companies are generating revenue outside of the United States or outside of the domestic market. As you can see here, it's Adobe is about 48%, Apple 66%, 56% for Facebook, 49% for Microsoft. And those are, as you know, multi-billion, even Apple, I think it's almost close to $2 trillion value company. So you can see the chunk of value that comes from international markets when you look at this. And, on the other hand, you have a company like Intuit, which always, Intuit is, for me, one of the great products, which are TurboTax. I use it every year. I hate filing my taxes like probably most people, but they make it as smooth as possible, so which I appreciate. But when you look at a product like Intuit, they only have 5% of their revenue coming from international. And the key problem that they have is that each country has its own set of rules and tax regulations and so forth. So it's really hard to scale for them and to go and really connect with all the countries around the world. But imagine if you're CEO of Intuit and if you can crack that nut, the value of Intuit on the stock market and so forth would skyrocket for sure. And I think this would be a great challenge for Intuit to take on but I think they've been taking a look at it for a while. But if the day they can be successful with that, I think it's going to be quite amazing for that company. So you could argue that, okay, I understand we want to go global, want to push our product around the world, but why do I need to localize? And don't, most people speak English around the world, that would be a good question. But actually, when you look at this slide here, which is from English First, so it's an organization that teach English around the world. They come up with some reports about English proficiency index, and I often use this report, to try to pitch for localization, even within Adobe. And basically, it indicates that of course, a couple of countries like Australia and UK and US, which are gray, gray on the map, and then some in Africa as well that speak English. But others, that for which the English is not the official language, quite a few of them actually show that the English proficiency is not as strong as you might expect. Some are really strong, like the Scandinavian countries. But then, in the green color, you have like moderate proficiency, and then as you go to the yellow, you get low proficiency, and then the orange color is very low proficiency. And if you want to sell products in those countries, it's going to be a necessity to really localize your user interface, documentation, and your whole experience for those customers. I often work with a research firm, which is called CSA, Common Sense Advisory Research. And they've done some research with B2C and B2B. And basically, they've interviewed people, consumers, and then also companies to understand how important was localization in the decision to buy a product. And as you can see on this chart, 40% of consumers will not buy a product if it's not available in their language, basically. So they're not ready to buy it if it's not available in their own language. And 65% of consumers also expect, would prefer to see the content in their language, which means that if you don't provide it, you may think, okay, it's not a big deal, but that also means that you don't really meet your customers' expectations. A lot of consumers will also feel much more connected to a product if the user forums, and the conversation on the user forums are in their language. They would maybe trust more the feedback from someone who speaks their own language instead of someone else. And so this is another important aspect to consider, is how do you deal with product reviews. And then finally, the last one that they had in the research was that you don't need translations that are necessarily like reviewed 3 times and that are just perfect. A lot of the consumers feel like, even machine translation in some situation may be okay, and so they just prefer to see something in their language instead of English, for example. And then the trend was quite interesting when CSA research came up with a B2B survey. I was actually surprised because I work in enterprise, with Adobe, and we use a lot of products that are still in English. Let's say you can think about Office and other, products that you may use for productivity tools that you have within your own company. But actually, the procurement team that work in those global companies, they also look at making sure that those products are available in the different locales. And it is part, this research here shows that, this is a key factor that procurement teams consider when they make the final decision about which product they're going to buy to support their organization. And as you can see here, 81% of companies will most likely not purchase a product which doesn't have a localized user interface. They will also want to make sure that those products have connect with the local best practices and the local rules that are available or in the different countries. So this is kind of linked to that culturalization aspect that I talked about. They will also want to make sure at 88% that that the support is provided in the language, because they don't want to maybe deal with this. You know, if you have a global company, you don't want to have everyone, let's say, outside the United States having to connect in English, for example, for the different support issues that they may have with the product. And then, you know, it's so important to them that actually 67% of them feel that they would be willing to pay even more for the product if it was localized. So as you can see, a lot of good reason why you have to localize your product on that. And, you know, when you don't get those when you miss those customers, you basically can consider that you miss a chunk of your total addressable market that you have for your product, and it's kind of disappointing, because, you know, it's there available for grab, and if you provide those languages, you know, even if you're not, you know, like convinced yet that, you know, it is a good thing for your customers to localize the product, you know, there are also other reasons, and one of the key reasons also that privacy and legal issues that you have to deal with. And in France, for example, there's something called like the Tout Bon law, which is from the 90s, and which basically says that, you know, every product which is consumer facing needs to be available with a localized user interface and documentation. In France, only products that that are technical and you know, maybe like a programming or administration, you know, things that would be handled by an administrator, IT admin or something like this, those can be left in English, but most of the products need to be localized into French. In China, there's a certification which is called the GB 18030 certification, and that certification enforce and make sure that your products support different character sets, so that the Chinese customers can type in different characters from all the scripts that are used in China. And they have a lot of different scripts, you know, also especially from some minority regions, and they want to make sure that those characters and scripts are represented in the character set. So if you don't support those character sets, you're not allowed to sell products in China. And then finally, more recently, if you're a product manager, I'm sure that you've had to deal with the GDPR, you know, compliance, and you know, this was set by the EU, you know, making sure that there's some best practices and that there's more control for the consumers to be able to manage the information that companies host about them, and be able to clean their profile, to view their profile, and then clean the data and this type of things. This is, again, if you go global, you need to know what's happening in the different countries and what are the requirements that you need to satisfy in order to sell in that country. Then, sorry, the last one where I think language is so important is that we are in the age of personalization, right? We all get emails that, you know, try to provide us the information that's relevant to us. I think that with personalization, you know, one of the probably the first key aspect of personalization is knowing your name, right? So they're going to contact you and they're going to say, you know, hopefully call you by your first name and then provide you information. But the second key component of personalization is language. If someone send me you know, an email with my first name, it's great. But if they start talking in another language than myself, you know, it might not resonate as much, and it kind of defies the purpose of personalization in that case. So in the context of personalization, I think language plays also a key role for the customers. Okay, so hopefully by now you're convinced that, you know, globalization, so going global with your product is important, and then that, you know, as you go global, that you also need to provide more localization and provide, you know, products that are in the language of your customers, basically. So how do you do that in an efficient way? So this is the next section of this talk that I'm going to cover. And the first tip that I would like to give to this community is definitely consider globalization from the get-go as you innovate and as you develop a new product or new features. A lot of historically internationalization and localization has often been considered as an afterthought. So the product is first developed in English, and then after that, we try to see how can we add more languages to this product now that this product is actually successful. But really the recommendation here is to really consider internationalization, localization from the get-go. And there was a study here from Xerox I think it was in the 80s, 90s timeframe, and it was picked up by Lingoport, which is a localization vendor. And basically, they looked at the cost of addressing issue along the timeline, the product life cycle, if you will. And if you address issue at the requirement level, the effort's going to be 1x. At the design level might be 2x, and so forth. But if you address those issues late in the cycle, you're going to have to do a lot of retrofit, and it's going to cost the company much more efforts. And so this is something you want to avoid. And for localization, they came up with like a 15x cost, if you will. So when you discover an issue, late in the process at the localization stage, because maybe you have like a hard-coded string, or maybe your locale is not working the way it should be, it's going to cost you many more effort to fix at that time instead of fixing it if you had considered it at requirement level. So really the key is think global from the start of your project. The other aspect too is this end-to-end customer experience, right? So you have customers, you're going to sell them products, but there are a lot of touch points that your customers will, where you're going to connect with, your customers will connect with your company, right? So they're going to look at your product, they're going to look at your documentation, at your support site, at your chats, at your forums, and so forth. And as they go through this customer experience, it's very important to keep language consistent and make sure that you offer the same support across the board. Otherwise, the experience is going to be very fragmented, and ultimately, your customers might go to a different, competitor. Not necessarily because your product is not that good, but just because that end-to-end experience is not sufficient for them. Then the third key recommendation here is to really engage once you go global, and you have these products, you want to really engage with your local offices, and what we call, at Adobe at least, we call them geos. And you want to understand what are the issues, what are the requirements that you have in those regions that are maybe a little bit different than what you see in the United States. Also, you want to understand the local market. For example, who are the competitors? What are their strengths? What are the features maybe that you can bring in or learn from those local competitors, and that you can bring in more at the global level for your product as a whole. Sometimes you need to understand also how the infrastructure is in those different countries. I remember many years ago with Adobe, in Japan, for example, a lot of the Japanese office was asking us to provide the documentation in PDF format, and the main reason was that it was the Japanese people were reading the documentation as on the train. As they commute to work in the morning, and they didn't have connection in the train, or it was expensive to do it through a mobile phone and so forth. So they wanted to download the whole documentation in a PDF format, and that was very unique to Japan, because other countries, people like commuting, maybe they don't read the documentation while they go to work and stuff like this. So you have to understand all those nuances in order to provide, again, a good experience to your customers. And then finally, try to connect with them and use your geo office to connect with your international customers so they give you the feedback that you want to know about the product. So now there's still some challenges here, you know, that as a product owner, you're gonna also still continue to face some challenges that are not totally solved. So I want to give you a heads up on those. One is the UX design, you know, so this is something that you know, you develop a product, you work with your UX designer, you brainstorm on the coolest UI that you can develop. But I definitely urge you to think about the room, the real estate, and leave some room for global expansion, as we say, correct? So for different languages, you're going to need to expand the user interface. And in general, the rule of thumb is that if, you know, in English, you have less than 10 characters, we recommend that you leave enough room to do a 300% expansion. And then if it's, and then you can just do 30% if it's less than, or if it's more than 10 characters. Also, you should be aware that the expansion is not always on the horizontal front. You know, with Asian languages, they're a little bit higher in terms of the height. And so you need also to accommodate that type of fonts. And then also, you know, when you use bold and italic and this type of, you know, emphasis for your fonts, you know, just be aware that this doesn't work in Asian languages. So these are things that, you know, you have to consider when you develop your UI. And then finally, you know, when it comes to icons and images, just also be aware that sometimes it's, you know, some icons might be politically incorrect around the world. And so you want to try to stay as neutral as possible. Otherwise, you know, you might have to revamp your product or you might get very bad feedback from some of the regions. So again, a good reason to engage with your geo offices to also get the feedback on your user design. A key problem with, or key challenge, you know, that we have to deal with localization is the agility, right? So all the products, and I think it's great in general, you know, a lot of the products now get released much faster than they used to be. But it also brings the challenge of agility and how do you get your product localized at this, you know, high speed deliverables that we deal with. And international, this really push more pressure on getting internationalization done right from the beginning. You know, in the past, when you had maybe an 18-month cycle to release a product, you know, if there was some internationalization issues, you could wait. Maybe you had more time to fix those internationalization issues down the development cycle. But now today, you don't have time to do that because the English product is going to go out very quickly, and you know, maybe on a 2-week cycle, or maybe a monthly cycle, or even a daily cycle in some companies. So it is critical that all engineers are really writing code the right way and well internationalized code from the get-go. You know, and so internationalization is definitely key. It's also important for the product for the localization teams to have really a well-automated workflow, and there are some tools available out there to do that, but it's important to make sure that the investment is made and that localization is fully automated. We don't have time in the localization team to hand off things manually through spreadsheets and through email and so forth when the whole process is really going fast automatically on the English side. And then finally, you know, the key recommendation is to integrate localization really as part of the core English development process. So localization, you know, should just come out. You build a product, you build it in a multilingual way. It's not, again, an afterthought. So everything is integrated together and every build gets localized on the fly, and that's the ultimate vision here. But it is a challenge, and it requires investment in resources and a great collaboration between the core product teams and then the localization team. Finally, the last challenge that you know, in consideration for product managers is really artificial intelligence. Like I said, I'm quite keen on and excited about everything which is happening about artificial intelligence. And in the localization world, machine translation has been a great tool to help the productivity of localization. So it's awesome that it's there. Machine translation is also great for user-generated content. And so it is very critical, and honestly the machine translation quality has increased over the last few years with the arrival of neural machine translation network, neural networks, and with this, a lot of products now also have natural language processes embedded in the products. So like, for example, you might have a spam filtering feature within your product, or you may have a sentiment analysis feature within your product. And while those features work well in English, it's important to build the different models also for the different locales that you're going to support. And this is a challenge today because the data set is not necessarily available in those different languages, especially smaller languages or less popular languages. And so as a product manager, you're going to have to decide how you're going to handle those natural language processing features for the different locales that you support with your product. The data is also important, right? So like when you build an AI model, you're gonna need to have a very diversified data set. A few years back, Facebook faced some challenge because they were building some face recognition algorithm, and in the data set, it was, I think, mostly using white people, maybe even white male. So basically, the face recognition engine didn't recognize, Asians and African Americans and so forth. So that means the data set was not diversified enough. And this is something that everyone needs to be aware of to make sure that, again, you build a model, and it should really be a model built for the whole world, not just a subset of it. And then finally, the long tail languages, is the challenge where those are small languages for which we don't have a lot of data. And this is where maybe machine translation can help to bridge the gap. So you could have a model where you use an English model, and then you do a machine translation back and forth to see what how to as a translation to support those long tail languages, basically as a little bit of the proxy. You use machine translation as a proxy, but this remains a challenge in industry too, and I think it's going to take a few years before the industry gets to support those long tail languages with artificial intelligence features. So this is what I wanted to cover today. So I hope gives you a good overview about why globalization is important, what are the best practices, and then the key challenges that we're going to face moving forward. So this is a quick summary here. So why is globalization so imperative to your business? Well, as I talk about, it's a revenue and growth engine. It is what your international customers expect. They're ready to walk away from your product if you don't offer them a localized version. You're going to miss basically a chunk of your total addressable market just by not providing those languages. In some countries, it's the law, so you cannot sell in a country if you don't have it localized and if you don't respect the certain requirements imposed by that country. And then also it's a key vector for personalization. Make sure when you localize and globalize a product, make sure you start to consider globalization from the start. This has been an issue for me for pretty much my career at Adobe. It's always call us early. You have an idea or concept, get globalization in the room as soon as you can. Also consider this end-to-end customer experience so that your international customers have a smooth experience. And then make sure you engage with your local offices to seek the feedback on your products, and then engage with them too to understand what are the key features for the specific markets. And then as you develop your product, make sure you also have consideration for your UX design. Leave some room for local expansions and different languages. Make sure the sprints will not need to be abbreviated all the time. Abbreviations is actually pretty painful for when it's not in when it's in your language. It's much better if you don't have any abbreviations. So that means designing a great UI. Make sure you also have everything in place to be agile. And then finally, you're going to have to tackle the challenge probably of artificial intelligence and consider how you're going to support the rest of the world when you have artificial intelligence features built into your product. So this is what I had for you today. I hope you find it interesting, and I'm open now for Q&A.